Hello YouTube, my name is Sapanta, and today I'm going to try to explain something from tort law called relational economic loss. So what is relational economic loss? Alright, so in negligence law, the basic rule is this. If someone's careless action causes harm that's foreseeable, they can be held responsible for it. For example, if I drive a car carelessly and crash into your car, that's a foreseeable loss. You can sue me for the damage. But things get tricky when the harm is economic, especially when it's indirect. And that's what we call relational economic loss. Now that happens when you lose money because someone else's property or business was damaged, not your own. Like imagine a power company accidentally cuts electricity to a factory. The factory owner loses money because production stops. But what about the workers? And what about people that need stuff from the factory but lose money because the factory's shut down? You see, that's relational economic loss. The loss is real, but it's indirect. And the courts are usually very reluctant to make people pay for this kind of loss. So why are the courts careful? Now, even though these losses are often predictable, courts worry that allowing everyone affected to sue would just open the floodgates. If one mistake could make someone liable for hundreds of ripple effect claims, then it'll just be chaos. That's why courts tend to draw a line. They only allow recovery for direct losses, not relational ones. So what's my view? Now, I think courts shouldn't abandon clear-cut legal principles in favor of vague policy reasons. Instead, they should base their decisions on legal principles, especially the idea of primary rights. And primary rights are basically your direct legal rights, like your right to own property or your own personal safety. If those rights are violated, then you can sue. But if someone else's property gets damaged and you only suffer financially because of that, your primary right hasn't actually been violated. That's why, legally, you don't get compensation. So let's look at some cases here. Alright, so the first case is Spartan Steel and Martin. And in this case, a power company's negligence cut electricity to a factory. And the factory lost money, and the court said you can recover for physical damage to your metal, but not for your profits you could have made while the power was off. A judge in this case, the great famous Lord Denning, he said this was mainly about policy. If we allowed everyone to claim for lost profits, it would just get out of hand. But some people weren't happy with this. They said the reasoning felt inconsistent. There wasn't a clear legal rule behind it. And then there's the case of Weller and Footermouth. Now in this case, there was an outbreak of disease that stopped a cattle auction. And the auctioneers lost business, but they didn't actually own the cattle, so their loss was relational. The court said they couldn't recover because they didn't have a proprietary interest, meaning that they didn't actually own the thing that got damaged. And finally, there's the case of Caltex Oil and the dredged Willemstad. And in this case, a ship accidentally damaged a pipeline owned by another company. Caltex had to pay more to transport oil another way. The court said that there was no recovery, again because it was indirect relational loss. So across all these cases, we can see the same pattern. Courts don't allow recovery for relational economic loss, even when it's foreseeable. Now, what are the policy versus legal justifications for this? Now, Lord Denning's argument was mostly about policy. He was limiting claims so things don't get out of control. That makes sense in practice, but that sacrifices fairness, right? Because if someone is negligent, shouldn't they be held responsible for the harm they cause, even if it's indirect? Now that's where the legal justification comes in. Now under tort law, damages are only owed when someone's primary rights are violated. If my property is damaged, my rights is violated. If your property is damaged and I lose money because of it, my right isn't violated. That's a clean legal reason why relational economic loss usually isn't recoverable. So what should the courts actually do? Now I reckon the courts should stick to this principled legal approach. It keeps tort law predictable, it keeps it fair, and it's limited to direct harm. If they tried to allow everyone indirectly affected to claim, it becomes way too uncertain and way too messy. This way, liability stays manageable and the law stays very clear. However, some people are going to say that this is unfair. They argue, well, what about the people that lost huge amounts of money because someone else's negligence, even if they weren't directly harmed? Now, that's a fair question. But if we allowed every indirect claim, the number of lawsuits would just explode. Businesses could face unlimited liability for one small mistake. The current rule might seem harsh, but it keeps the legal system practical and predictable. It's a trade-off between fairness to individuals and stability for everyone. So to sum it up, relational economic loss happens when someone loses money because another person's property or business is damaged. Even if that loss is foreseeable, courts usually won't allow recovery because there's no violation of a primary right. This rule might feel restrictive, but it keeps tort law balanced and workable. Now, in the end, it's about protecting the legal system from chaos, while still staying true to core principles of responsibility and fairness. Thank you.